Endgame's converged endpoint security platform is transforming security programs, their people, processes, and technology with the most powerful endpoint protection and simplest user experience, ensuring analysts of any skill level can stop targeted attacks before information theft. Endgame unifies prevention, detection, and threat hunting to stop known and unknown attacker behaviors at scale with a single agent. For more information, visit endgame.com. Recorded Future. They help security teams make more confident decisions faster. Recorded Future's technology automates broad collection and analysis of cyber threat data and delivers the rich external context you need to understand alerts and emerging threats. With real-time threat intelligence from Recorded Future, security teams respond to threats 63% faster and find undetected threats 10 times quicker. To get started, go to recordedfuture.com/Security Weekly and sign up for the Recorded Future Cyber Daily. Every day, you'll receive an email with the top results for trending technical indicators, cyber news, exploited vulnerabilities, suspicious IP addresses, and more. Subscribe today and stay ahead of cyber attacks. Effectively securing your organization and its reputation requires a smarter approach. To maximize efficiency and minimize risk, security experts turn to LogRhythm, the only leading solution built solely for security teams by a security team committed to your success. With next-gen SIEM, user and entity behavior analytics, network traffic and behavior analysis, security automation and orchestration, and compliance, LogRhythm provides security made smarter. Welcome to the State of Penetration Testing Roundtable discussion. A quick reminder for our audience, again, to join our mailing list and receive notifications about upcoming webcasts and the all-new, for the first time ever announced on the show, virtual training. That's right. Do you want a free hour of training? Come check it out and join our mailing list, where we will be also discussing the Security Weekly events, where we distribute awesome Security Weekly swag. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to join today. Welcome, everyone, to what has become really a holiday tradition here at Security Weekly to get a bunch of hackers together and talk about penetration testing. Got a lot of people to introduce. Larry is embodying the gay Santa biker outfit. If you noticed, that might have changed. Very nice to have you, of course, Larry.
Never mind. Never mind.
Mr. Jeff Mann is here. Try and contain yourself, Jeff. I know Larry's very, very sexy right now.
He's very sexy.
I can see it look in his eyes right now.
Hello.
Jason
Larry.
Albuquerque.
Paul, you're looking pimp.
Hey, thank you very much. Ira Winkler is here with us. Ira, welcome. It's your first roundtable today. Glad to have you in studio.
Thanks. I don't know if I'm glad to be here yet.
We got quite the interesting group assembled today. Patrick Laverty. If I can say,
Yeah, I'm all the way down. Hey, Paul.
Hey, Patrick.
Good to see you down there.
Good to see you. Joe Gray is here with us. Is that an elf hat? Is that?
Yes.
Gotcha. Very nice. Very nice. Tyler Robinson.
Hola. Happy to be here.
Lee Neely.
Happy to be here. Good to see we're all still alive.
Joff Thayer.
That would be me. Good to be here. I've stumbled into New England again.
Yes.
Yeah.
Dave Kennedy is on the lines remotely. Dave, welcome.
Hello there, everybody. Good to see everybody. And I wish I was there in person. Sorry.
That's okay. You're here.
The table's
virtually.
full.
It is pretty full. It's okay though. Mr. Tom Liston is here with us. Tom, welcome.
Oh.
And Chris Hadnaghi featuring Dave Kennedy is here with us. Welcome, Chris.
I got my favorite I'm the one that came up with the idea first, Chris. That's my idea. That is not fair.
I use this background whenever I go on the news because, Dave is supposed to be.
Because if you don't use it, they don't invite you back.
Yeah, because if I don't have Dave, I never get to go on the news. So I figured if I have Dave as my background, I can get invited on news programs.
I love the shenanigans.
At least Fox.
Just oh my.
Just Fox.
Mr. Ed Scotus is with us remotely. Ed, welcome.
Hey, how's it going? It's great to see you guys.
It's going well.
Most of you look fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
Which ones, Ed? Which ones?
I'm not going to call it.
Don't go there, Ed.
It's a trap.
I think that one of the things we've seen in the security industry is folks like to declare things as dead. Penetration testing has been seemingly on the chopping block at certain times. What is inspiring to me, largely due to many of the fine folks that we've assembled today and many others in the community, pen testing is thriving as an activity that's pushing the security programs forward for many organizations and has continued, in my opinion, to evolve to provide value to organizations. And as the attacks and defenses change, right, pen testing and the types of testing has changed as well, I'm going to use this opportunity to talk about some of the ways in which it's changed, also challenge some of the notions, yet again, as we do every year, of the value provided by penetration testing, which we've come out largely unscathed in pen testing due to innovation. So I will open it up, to everyone who wants to go first and talk about, Ed Scotus, the major changes in penetration testing that you've seen.
I remember when we were on episode 500. You're on episode, 5,000 now?
632.
We were talking about how pen testing was going through some rough times, and it's really kind of devolving into vulnerability assessment and such, and we were a little depressed about it. I remember the panel. I'm actually quite optimistic now. I think things are going quite well for the industry. I think increasingly leadership is seeing the business value that we provide. It's not perfect or anything like that, but I think things are evolving quite nicely with adversary emulation, red teaming. Also, I think we live in the golden age of C2 frameworks. You saw George Orchilis's fantastic work on the C2 matrix. So there's lots of really good things happening, I think, in penetration testing, and I'm more heartened now than I have been in years.
Yeah, I would have to disagree with that.
I put it out there because I was hoping.
Yes, this is good.
Because when I remember doing a penetration test in like 1994, where I was first outside NSA actually test to do it as a test instead of real. And the reality was that we were just making up the rules, doing whatever the hell we wanted, whenever we wanted it. And all we had to do was hand them their crown jewels in about 38 minutes. And everybody's like, wow, oh my God. And now in most organizations, the reality is it's still that way. You do have, like, for example, what Ed was talking about, where some organizations are using red teams really, really well, where they have a really good security program. And in that case, what they're doing is they're looking for that last vulnerability they weren't able to find that you have to dig deep to find. But the reality is that that's not most organizations. That's organizations like the large banks, and who can bring in people to do very strategic ones. But most of the time, they want a vulnerability assessment, or they should want a vulnerability assessment, and they don't leave the money to fix the stuff. And that's the biggest problem I see.
Yeah,
Truth.
Yeah, I'll disagree with that slightly. I think there are different things that people look for in the maturity levels of the programs, and I think to Ed's point, that's where this industry has really gotten to, which is a great thing to see. Is that you have different companies at different levels of their maturity. You have folks that have zero asset inventory, that all they need is vulnerability management. You have other organizations that may use penetration testing to identify weaknesses in their security program that they need to address, more strategic things like, hey, we need to focus on patch management or software development lifecycle. And then you look at kind of the more mature organizations. And what's interesting is that 10 years ago to now, we are finding more and more mature organizations than we ever have before, which means that something's working. It's becoming much more difficult for us, even in the adversary simulation side, to go unnoticed in a lot of these organizations. And what threat emulation is really supposed to be is understanding your company's threat models, who the adversaries are, these spaces that they play in, and their capabilities, so that you can test the same effectiveness. And it's not to reduce every vulnerability in your organization. What it's supposed to be designed for is understanding the different phases of attacks, everything from initial access to exploitation to privilege escalation, lateral movement, and looking at all of those different phases and saying, we're not going to be perfect in every single one of these areas, but hopefully we have some very good coverage in all of these different areas, so that if we detect in the early stages, great. If it's in the latter stages, that's not as good, but at least we have the capabilities of responding much more effectively and minimizing the damage than we ever have before, knowing that we're never going to be perfect. Now, I'd say that the evolution of the penetration testing industry has changed from being, we're going to go in and smash and grab and destroy everything and going for the crown jewels and handing you a report, to really working with organizations to understand how those attack patterns work and to build not just, fixes for those specific issues they identified, but also what the root causes for those were. And ultimately, what were you hear this term a lot, the tactics, techniques, and procedures that we operated by in order to build better detections in place. And that really has made this industry substantially better.
Yeah, I have to
Jeff.
evaluate a bunch of pen test reports for everybody all together.
PCI.
Everybody drink.
Cheers. And I rarely see the Nessus output talking about root cause.
So back to the root cause, though, you look at, like, as an industry, too, the root cause, all of these security vendors are being pushed into security as a initial standpoint. Look at Microsoft. Look at Windows effectively. Windows XP, you look back, if you have a Windows shop, you guys are going to be owned, you're going to hand the crown jewels. It is much more difficult now to get into a Windows shop. Windows 10 by default is being built with security in mind, app whitelisting, AMSI. You're getting all these O365 products that have advanced security features. So the awareness of all the product vendors that are putting out the stuff that we use every day for pretty much everything is now taking security seriously, and it's being built in. So I think whatever we're doing, bringing that light to it, has to be working.
Joff.
Yeah, so I see what a lot of us are circling around here is actually endpoint customer security from a maturity perspective. A lot of us in various companies have different levels of maturity of customer that we're dealing with. Those that are on the mature end of the scale are those that are much more suited to the adversary emulation. They're much more suited to the more mature red team kind of exercise. There are plenty of companies out there that are customers of ours in the industry that are not even close to that space. Yep. And for those that don't have that level of maturity, that do not have that level of even IT environment security, those are the ones where I don't think they actually are seeing much value out of the services that we provide, because those are the ones that are just not really on the first rung of the ladder. And I think we're hearing diversity of opinion based on the customer base that various of us in the room are actually dealing with on a day-to-day basis.
I think it's measurement of the security maturity of an organization and then customizing the testing to maximize the effectiveness of the test. It's been one of the major evolutions.
Well, I would say so you're kind of right. Like, red teaming is the biggest canary in the coal mine. Depending on, for example, how they approach red teaming, like the way Dave and Ed were talking about, if they approach pen testing to understand the adversary, if they approach pen testing to figure out how to get things better, TTP, all that sort of stuff, then you're dealing with a mature organization. But if you're dealing with an organization that frankly is like Jeff for PCI drink, what you're looking at is there's a lot of people who just want to be compliant and move on, and that's the problem. And, again, to a large extent, yes, we are seeing a bigger clump of people move towards the secure side, but there's still a lot of people on the more skewed side that are not using penetration testing in the idealistic Pollyanna format that we'd love to see them.
And do you think we're pushing attacks towards those people by helping the guys that are mature? Are we pushing attacks towards the people who are immature in some sense?
That's an interesting aspect, Tom.
Good question.
Yeah, it's quite possible, because I used to tell an analogy years ago when I was doing pen testing and selling it that there was one frame of mind trying to paint an analogy as if you were a house thief and you went into a neighborhood, are you more or less likely going to try to break into the house that's got the little, this home protected by ADP sign in front of it, or are you going to go after the house that doesn't have the sign?
Well, maybe ADP, but if it says this house protected by AK-47, you might get a different...
But, I mean, from our perspective, as an industry, where do we become responsible for educating these clients? Right?
It's a great point, Chief.
Think about this, right?
Yes,
I mean,
really
my
good
organization
point.
really takes focus on client success. And part of that is being a consultant and helping them through, we're an IT services and managed services organization. So we help them through quote unquote digital transformation, getting on board with modern technologies, consulting them on how to
Yeah, digital transformation is definitely.
You said stop saying it.
But these are the conversations they're coming to us with. That's why I said quote unquote, right? They're bringing that to us. We're educating them on reality.
But so I feel like the market is being educated to be able to solicit for the appropriate test. But do we have, and I'll turn it up to the panel, right? Do we have data and or experiences you want to share where you've seen where customers are more mature in scoping and getting the appropriate test for where they are in the maturity model?
I would say we have a gap in terminology. We have customers who don't understand the difference between a vulnerability assessment and a penetration test.
Still.
We can
Yeah.
But I wrote an article back in 1998 called Audits, Assessments, and Penetration Tests, oh my, and it was called seminal then. And if I rewrote it now, because it's off the internet, because Information Security Magazine's off the internet, it would still be a seminal article, because nobody has any clue. Well, no, I shouldn't say nobody. Many people do not have a clue what is the appropriate test at the appropriate time for the appropriate purpose. And we need to kind of, when they come to us, we shouldn't be, yay, I get to do a penetration test. It should be, penetration testing might be the last step that you do. It's like, let's do a vulnerability assessment, because if I do a penetration test, I'm going to go through the vulnerability assessment and waste a lot of money finding the vulnerabilities I already know exist.
Or how about even before that, just doing an asset discovery?
Mm-hmm.
Well, Shodan should not be your asset inventory system.
I think Ed had a comment.
Hold on, Ed.
I saw a presentation a couple years ago by this really brilliant and handsome guy, Liston, Tom. His main point in his presentation was that primarily what we do as pen testers is education. We're educating them up front, just like we had been talking about. You know, what is it that you really need? How can you best spend your money? Maybe it's vulnerability assessment, maybe it's asset inventory, but all the way through the project, and even in the end, as a pen tester, you kind of view yourself as providing that educational service to your customer to help them better understand and manage their business risk. And I think doing it with that kind of mindset really provides more value.
Agreed.
Absolutely. And reports.
Sorry, Tom.
That's okay. I'm just going to say reports need to be documents that continually educate the client. After you walk out the door, that's the only thing that's left behind.
Yep.
And your report needs to be written in a way that continually educates the client.
Joe.
I don't want to get too heavy into vendor bashing, but I think a little bit of it may be that a lot of vendors are trying to direct companies into, you want this whiz-bang product or service or this or that. In my own experience, I've dealt with salespeople trying to sell people high-end pen tests or even red team engagements that were supposed to be objective-based, that were scoped identically to a pen test. They're pushing them for that because it's a higher billable rate, as opposed to starting and saying, the first thing you need to do is get everything off of Shodan, because Shodan is not your asset inventory system. Do your discovery, have your database, then start to do your vulnerability management program. Once you have that, and then a certain level of buy-in from people like Jeff with their compliance schemes, then add it to do the pen test to determine the realization. Then after you can successfully do something with that, move into objective-based red teaming with things like, how long does it take someone to infiltrate from a web server to get to the crown jewels? And more importantly, the thing that's not emphasized is detection.
Yeah,
and
what's the dwell time?
Exactly. And with detection, unfortunately, a lot of the detection vendors and marketing materials, it's all based on FUD. And people, we just become tone deaf to it because we've heard advanced persistent next generation AI machine learning synergy. I'm going to get everybody drunk off this.
One thing I want to say.
Hold on, Dave.
Yeah, one thing I want to say on that specifically is that it's our job and responsibility to communicate what we believe is best for that company, right? Being practitioners and people in the industry, and I think John and I reference this quite a bit, but we're still talking a lot about the same things because you have a lot of traditional security pen testing puppy mill companies, right? And their whole goal is to sell as much as they possibly can. They'll use red teaming and penetration testing interchangeably. I'll tell you right now, when we get customers where we start to talk to them, like, I have to have a red team right now. I have to have a red team. When you start to understand why they want a red team, we're like, you're not really ready for that yet. Here's what we would recommend, and here's our approach that we would do. That's just being good stewards of information security. And I think, it's our job to really emphasize and communicate that, and to be, good people talking about what is the most approachable thing for a company and how to build a security program. But as you mentioned, I think a lot of these folks, they go to a specific summit or an information security conference, and they hear all these different words, and they're like, hey, I have to buy this product, or I have to do this, I have to do that. We really have to guide them in a way that shows value to increasing their security program, and whether that's leveraging a penetration test so that you can get additional funding and budget to build out your program, or getting down to root cause analysis of why specific things are there, or maybe they're mature enough to handle more adversary emulation, where you're trying to simulate adversaries against the organization. But one question I'll pose out to everybody on the panel here: what is the number one concern for small to medium-sized businesses right now?
Well, let me actually respond, because I think Dave touched on a point that I really like to make sure it doesn't get passed over easily. At the end of the day, everybody on this session is a security professional. We're not a hacking professional. We are supposed to leave the companies more secure than how we left them. And a lot of people who do red teaming, who do penetration testing, miss that point. Our goal isn't just to laugh at them like Nelson and go, ha ha. Our goal is to say, here's how you fix it, and too many people don't. And frankly, to answer Dave's question, I'd say the number one problem I see with small to mid-sized businesses is fundamentally good cyber hygiene, because as was said before today, Windows is pretty good. It's how you set it up that really matters, how you set up the network, how people access it. That's the problems that we see.
Yeah, I think there's several trends that have pushed the needle past where you're describing pen testing, Ira, and that is the MITRE attack framework and attack simulation. Is allowing companies to test their own infrastructure before they have a penetration test. It's the purple team exercises that are done in conjunction with the pen test teams, and it's technologies where the report is a living document inside of a system that once it's delivered, the pen test team is continually working with them. Those are the trends that I've seen in the past couple of years that I agree. In the past, there were more companies that were just like, yeah, here's your report, good luck, right? But we've realized that we want to, as you said, leave them in a more secure state, or help them reach that more secure state after the testing. And the trends I'm seeing are pushing companies to do that.
Now, last thing I'll mention here really quick, just really fast, is that MITRE is a great asset to the community. It's also one of our biggest disadvantages, because people are using it as a control effectiveness test, which is not what it should be designed for or be used for.
Agreed. It's how you use it.
Yep.
It's how you use it.
It's not the size, it's how you use it. Joff.
So I've been waiting very patiently, but I just wanted to double down on that point just a little bit. I think we're circling around something that all of us encounter a lot, and frankly, I know a lot of geeks are going to shudder when I say this, but it is helpful to sit on sales calls once in a while, because when you're in the pre-sales process, you can pretty much predict what the maturity level of the customer that you're talking to is, and what probably ought to be pitched to them. And I'll follow on that without throwing anybody on the bus here, but occasionally I do receive an engagement where I know that customer is not ready for the level of stuff I'm going to deliver, and that's a mistake. It should never get to that point. We really need to be very, very careful as an industry with the right level of service to the right level of customer. That's the mature and appropriate response on the industry's behalf. Because if you were to throw like a full-blown red team exercise at a small medium business that has not even begun to get on the first rung of their asset inventory.
You mean on the sales call, you're like, how do you stack up to the NIST cybersecurity framework? And they go, what's that?
Yeah,
That's like a huge
exactly. There's like a massive disconnect here. So it's really, really important.
Or more importantly, how many devices are on your network? I don't know.
Right.
Some.
It's really, and look, we're not being I'm not trying to be disrespectful here. Everybody's at a different place in their journey in IT. It's really important that we actually engage the customer where they're at that particular moment in that particular maturity level, because if we don't, we're not doing anybody a favor.
Well, and it's the difference between having a relationship with a customer and just trying to wring as much money out of that client as you possibly can. And if you're building a relationship with a client, if you're willing to work with them and help them become educated, help them build their program, help them become more secure, then, in the long run, you're probably going to end up getting your money's worth out of that client as well. So
right, it's a two-way street.
I want to go to Chris, because Chris, the last time you were on the show, you talked about how not everyone necessarily needs, like if everyone could hit a physical penetration test, probably not the best thing. Also, you've described clients that have basically learned and grown to the point where, I mean, do they need a physical pen test because they've developed their processes so far with your and your team's help?
Yeah, I've been sitting here trying to find a way to disagree with Dave.
So tough.
It's hard to do, Chris. You and I, we're on the same page all the time, man.
Just because I really want to disagree with Dave, because his chin is right in my head, as you can see here from the screen. But sadly, I have to agree with him, as terrible as that is for me. But no, the reality is, I agree that as an industry, I think some of the struggles I've seen that, we go back, I don't know, Dave, when did we start doing our own companies? Like 10, 11 years ago? Yeah. And just getting someone, I'm focused completely just on SE, right? So getting someone to agree to an SE pen test back then was, you were begging. You were like, hey, I'll do it for really cheap or free, and now the maturity in, let's say, the business community is so much better. Where I'm seeing people, they're calling and they know what phishing and vishing and SE teaming is. But at the same time, I agree with Dave in the sense that somebody went to a speech, they heard someone talk about this amazing red team experience, and then you get these companies that have never sent a phish to any of their employees. They've never done one test. They barely run vulnerability scans, but they desperately want what they think is a red team, but they don't even understand what red teaming is. They don't understand that concept. So, yeah, we could sell it, and wouldn't that be a nice payday? Sure, but wouldn't it be better? And Paul, we've talked about this before on your show. Wouldn't it be better if I took the time to educate that client and say, hey, here's a 5-step approach to how we can get you ready for a red team? And it may not be in a month, and 6 months, and 12 months, and 18 months. It may be a 2 or 3 year process. But if you're willing to work with me, here's an example of another client that we worked with, and here's where they are today. And that seems to work so much better for us. I mean, I have a client we just signed on again this year, and we're going on this will be our 10th year with that client. That long-term relationships, because we do exactly that. We sit, we work with them, we look at how they want to advance, and then we work with them to do that instead of just selling them what the biggest price tag item is.
Yeah, and that's the key, right? It's building that relationship. It's getting away from that transactional model and getting into that business relationship model, right? So you're understanding the customer, you're understanding, their environment, their culture, their business culture, right? And now you're adding value over time. You're there for them through the journey.
I've never been a big fan of, we're an enterprise, and this year we're going to use this pen test firm, and then next year we're going to use a different firm to get a different perspective. I've always recommended that you find a partner.
Agreed.
You stick with that partner, right? Absolutely. And a good partner, if you come to them and say, I want maybe some different testing, a good partner will go, hey, we've got a relationship with this other pen test company. We can give you that same level of
I agree with this philosophically, but to echo what Ira was saying earlier about the number of companies that do this versus not, I am hard-pressed to think of a lot of companies that would recognize that they have a need for education and security expertise, and they're going to start with a pen testing company or a pen test exercise. That they're going to go out and seek that because they know that that's where they need to start, whether we agree whether that's where they need to start or not.
Well, I think part of the problem is that the customers think they know what they want before we get to them. They come to us saying, this is what we want based on this. And it's really hard because I've had conversations with customers who said, oh, I'm like, well, what do you want? And they're like, we want a pen test. I'm like, why? It's like, well, we want to know where we're vulnerable. I'm like, I don't need to waste money to tell you that. Let me go in and do an open vulnerability assessment. It's like, but I told my board we're having a pen test because that's what they read. I'm like, that's not going to get you secure, because are you saving money for the fixes? They're like, no, we just have this money for the pen test, and next year we'll do the fixes. I'm like, I really don't want to do that. And I wish we could go in there and educate a lot of people. We have a problem in that we need to educate the people before they get to us in some cases, because it's great if we can talk to the customer. It's great if we can convince them that they're wrong. But that's pretty hard to do on occasion. Sometimes it works. More frequently, if we don't want to do it, they're going to find somebody else who does.
Yeah, John.
Just want to make one comment on Paul's idea, which I love. Let me just be really open and honest here. One of my big fears with some of our mature customer relationships is that they're building defenses for our pen tests.
Yeah.
Yep. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yep.
So I don't like a frequent rotation, but I like the fact that I'm friends with Dave, or I'm friends with Larry, or that I can actually reach out to other firms and say, look, let's exchange a customer here, because I truly am afraid, and I won't necessarily admit it, but I am truly afraid that they're building defenses to our particular tools, tactics, and procedures, which I think is potentially a blind spot. And so not necessarily rotating on an annual basis, but rotating on maybe a 3 to 4 year basis is not a bad idea.
But doing that in partnership and sharing information, not just with the customer, but between firms.
That's
I didn't
right.
want to
That's
call.
right.
I mean, I know you guys do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I know
didn't
you
wanna call
would.
it out.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think it's a really positive thing. I think it's the blind going, I want to use Pentest firm A, and then I'm like not even going to share the report with Pentest firm B, and I want to.
No, it's got to be a strong relationship.
It's gotta be
But I guess that comes.
That's the key. You're creating a strong relationship-based ecosystem at that
And it's
point.
a,
for the
it's a
customer. That adds
continuation
value.
of the
this comes,
existing
sorry, this comes
relationship.
down to a bigger
Yes.
principle that they're designing. I don't want to see customers designing their security programs against pen tests.
Exactly.
I want to see them design a fundamentally secure infrastructure, and then they could throw different penetration testing companies at them to
Agreed.
see where the holes are.
Yes.
And switching up pen test companies, again, that's okay, but not if the purpose is, okay, we've secured against your attacks, now let's secure against the others. If they don't have a nice, secure, like, again, a boat. The boat has to be able to float before they could repel pirates. And
But that's assuming that these customers know where to start with security, and that's where pen testing, I think, oftentimes
Well,
you
we
either
talk-
don't have buy-in.
We talked about that in our. It's
did.
really going back to our blue team. Like, where do you start, and what information do you have to base building your defenses around? I don't like basing it off of, hey, on the internet someone saw this attack, so we should prevent it. Hey, on a pen test we saw this attack. We should make our systems resilient and hardened, and then to Ira's point, right? Then have it tested to see maybe where we missed something, right? Larry, I know you had
Because the pen test isn't
this
a-
goes into
Hold on
discussion.
one wait, Larry first, and then
you would have to jump back just a little bit, but you know, you made that comment about having a partnership with a pen testing firm, and I think you threw a good word in there. Was a good pen testing firm.
Yeah.
Tom, back when you and I were working together, we have we know of a customer that has worked with us for many years, that we have a multi-year engagement with them. And Tyler, you know who this one is too. I don't even need to say the name. But they actually changed their rules so that we could continue to work with them over multiple years, because we were so dynamic with our testing every time we went in there. And part of the reason they came to us was they were dealing with one of those really big firms that are, using air quotes, good. And the first year they found a bunch of stuff. Yep. They fixed the problems. They came in the next year. They got a little bit. They came in the third year, and they got nothing. Like, you were completely secure. We found no vulnerabilities, no issues in your network. And they thought that was kind of suspicious, and they paid them a ton of money to find nothing. And we came in the next year, and Tom wiped the floor with them. And then the next year we wiped the floor with them. It just took another couple of hours. And the year after that, I do believe the quote was...
with different tactics.
With different tactics.
Yes.
And I do believe the third year was Tom, the phrase that I repeated back to the customer was, Tommy Liston, I fucking hate you.
He walked in the door, looked at me, and said that. Yeah.
Yes. And I laughed and damn near fell out of my chair.
But I guess this is this is part of the problem. I don't see a penetration test as not the measure of a security program at the end of the day.
Absolutely not.
I mean, a good a penetration test is, because I can promise you, I don't care what organization you are, I don't care how good your security is, I'm eventually going to get in. That's a given. I don't care if you're the CIA.
But did they see you? Did they? Were they able to detect it?
Yeah, but and the detection and everything like that. But because you're always going to get in, the question is, how resilient is your network? And I don't want to see security based on pen tests.
Or resilient is your process.
Yeah, or
Right?
well, yeah. Resilient should be the state of being, I guess.
Right. Yeah.
So I agree with that. I don't want to see security based on pen tests. That was really the fear that I was calling out. And I think if you're taking a mature approach to the work you're doing, you should always have that in the back of your mind. I do not want you to tune your defenses to our tactics. That is That
We
is
should tune them to MITRE attack framework, and then we're good, right?
Hang on. So that gets into a really big discussion.
That's the simplified approach.
Really quick.
we should hand it to Ed. I think Ed had a comment.
Really quick here. I want to say something specifically on
Dave is
on
Ed's
the-
goes.
Dave is Ed. Dave is Ed now.
Dave, go ahead, take it, Dave. It's all yours, man.
So Jeff Moss actually commented on this a couple years ago while he was at opening up for Black Hat. And this is actually one of my greatest fears that I have in security today, aside from all the other things that I have to deal with, is that, Jeff said, as an industry, we talk very heavily about the tactics, techniques, and procedures of attackers and how they operate and all these different things. We talk a good game, but as an industry, we're solely focused on techniques. And that is very damaging to the industry, because basically what we're doing is we're saying, hey, if we've seen this in the wild before, then we can write a detection against that, and all of a sudden now we're good. And so mapping something like the MITRE attack framework and saying, listen, here's an attack, here's a detection, we're good. Instead of focusing on the tactics and the procedures that the attackers actually exhibit as they're going after your infrastructure. And that's the big difference that we have to focus on as an industry, is less on the techniques, as you mentioned. We're not focusing on the pen test results and taking those and building it directly in, but looking at the behavior that those types of things exhibit. Look at things like lateral movement. There is probably 50 different ways of conducting lateral movement across your environment.
Right.
But why not baseline lateral movement in your environment about what's legitimate lateral movement, and look for any lateral movement? Successful authentication attempts like 4624, successful login types from login type 3s, network login types, and look at those across your entire environment and look for deviations in those. So looking more at the behavior that certain things exhibit than the actual technique itself. And I think that's a successful approach. But not many folks are doing that. They're really focused on, listen, can I get this red team automation framework, which obviously is a bunch of insane marketing craziness, and run through all these command line arguments, and then do we have detections against that? And all of a sudden now we're good. That's a bunch of hogwash.
So I
right?
experienced this developing our internal application, right, where you can go through a checklist, right? Security is not a checklist. I could say, yes, like I'm doing this in my Docker config, and yes, I'm not using this library, but when you step back and look at the architecture and design of your network, of your application, you should think, how do I make this as resilient as possible? That's not looking at what attacks are out there today, because they're going to change tomorrow. It's not looking at how the last pen test may have got in. It's how do I make this as resilient as possible, and how do I make it easy for myself to find when someone's attacking it, when they're successful, and maybe when they're pivoting once they're inside.
Yeah,
we need to get back to that, not the checklist. Hold on, Jeff. Ed?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I really think that comes back to the pen testers themselves. We need to, in our reports, make sure that we're delivering to the customer this sort of root cause analysis. And maybe it's not in individual findings. Obviously, you want to help them fix that finding. But maybe in the executive summary or some other part of that document, you as a pen tester need to help that customer up its game. Not merely fixing that problem, but instead dealing with a sort of systemic issue so that they can get better and not just fix the one thing you found. I think that'll help address what Joff has been talking about, what Ira's been emphasizing, that root cause analysis. It really does come back to the pen tester to deliver that extra value.
I mean, it's kind of like a really funny medical analogy, right? But I get this rash and I put a cream on it and it goes away. But I keep getting the rash, and it turns out I'm allergic to some food. Well, stop eating the food, right?
Oh, I thought it was from something else.
Turns out you're allergic to the lotion.
Could be a lot of reasons for the rash, right? a lot of root causes there.
A really bad analogy here.
Sorry. That was more to make a joke than anything. But it embodies the point that we don't just want to keep applying band-aids, right? We want to fix the root cause, the design and architecture of our systems and network. Lee, because Jeff, you've been talking way too much.
So
critical.
Ed, you triggered a thought I had. It wasn't that many years ago when it came to remediating vulnerabilities and taking steps to try and help our endpoints, that IT would come back and say, all the stuff that cyber put on there is eating 37.2% of my machine, and therefore we can't do it, or words to that effect. Is that changing? Is it become? It seems like things are getting less impactful and smarter, so that customers are more willing to implement the remediation that we've identified. And I'm picking on endpoints, but I know it's bigger than that. But is that a trend, or am I way out in left field?
Well, I mean, I would say that that is a trend because, again, as was mentioned, Microsoft is building security right into the platform itself, where it's not even overhead, for lack of a better term. The processing capability at the same time, they don't even see it. We also start putting a lot of network-based devices that's been detecting traffic, filtering it, and the lag time is negligible, if at all. So, I mean, it seems to be, it's not a non-issue, but it seems to be getting significantly better.
The more transparent, the better? Or is that
I
a bad
think the
term?
less transparent, the better.
Okay, well, yeah.
And I think this is also something from, Moore's Law is helping us out here as well.
It's hard to take Ed serious right now.
I think that's like the 7th different outfit that Ed has adorned. I would expect nothing less, Ed.
I promised listener that I would look good for him on this.
And you know what's sad is I can't even see you.
You can't even, well, you're going to have to watch this recorded then, buddy.
I guess I'm going to have to.
So, no, but this is the point I was getting at in the beginning. Things are getting better. Yeah, there are some companies that are very immature, but overall, as a pen tester, now is a great time to be alive. There are more people moving up that ladder of maturity. The underlying operating systems are getting better and more secure. It makes our work more fun and interesting rather than just popping the same vulnerability again and again. I think these are really good times for us.
I have a question, if I can pose.
Please do, Chris.
Thank you. How much of an effect do you think having just like randomly hundreds of people popping into the industry without experience or education, but hanging a shingle saying they're like an expert pen tester, how much do you think that affects the clients that you're working with and being confused about what is good and what is bad as services?
I think it affects pricing sometimes, but the smarter smarter customers are not going to buy that. They're going to look at experience. They're going to look at reports. I'm saying the smarter ones. There's a lot of people, but generally,
there are smart customers who have budget constraints and they need to go with the cheap RFP, right?
Yeah, they're smart. There are smart technical buyers,
and that's unfortunate.
And there are smart technical buyers, and there are not so smart business buyers.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll give a case study. I was once awarded a penetration test, and then the company rejected it, and the CISO said they just went with a local company that came in at a third of your price, and he's like, I'm going to send you their penetration test report.
Oh, by the way, that's my brother-in-law.
Yeah. Sorry. And the penetration test report basically came up, and we were proposing a penetration test of their whole infrastructure. This person, they handed in a penetration test of a web application, and they declared the web application excellent regarding security because there were only 6 critical vulnerabilities of the 1,048 studied.
And one of them was Port 80's open.
Yeah. And they're like, this is what they got because they went with a low-cost local vendor, not even understanding this, and they overruled the CISO on getting a full-scope pen test because they pulled out that piece of paper. And
did they learn their lesson, do you think?
The web application might have been hacked by request, and then they learned the problem of only leaving 6 critical vulnerabilities out of 1,048.
That comes back to the problem with marketing, though, and all the hype and blinky lights with inside the industry already. It's hard even for good companies that are established and people that are well known in the community to know who does good pen tests and who doesn't, because you can have a really nice proposal that goes to procurement and even a security team that looks amazing, good graphics, they outline a good methodology, and they're a name brand household company or one of the big 4 or whatever. You're still not getting good pen tests. You don't really have that ability even in being a professional, even to know who does the good pen tests outside of the community.
Joe's been waiting patiently.
So looking back from my experience as a consultant with maybe borderline pen test puppy mill, a lot of companies don't know where to start, really, and they look out to other companies to say, hey, this is what you need. And I mean, it's back to the previous point of trying to get that transactional contract for the maximum dollar amount. But until we see local admin taken away segregation of duties, multi-factor authentication, all the best practices that we all hear harped on every podcast and most every talk, in all the basics, until the basics are done right and become a household name, similar to like phishing. 5 years ago, that was industry jargon. Just like some feedback I received when writing for Forbes, OSINT was considered industry jargon. I wasn't allowed to use it. Phishing is allowed now. So when things like multi-factor authentication become a household name, through things like the media attention that Ring's been getting in the past week or so, things like that, that's what's going to improve industry as a whole, that's going to improve pen testing, that's going to improve the reports that go to the clients. But until then, companies, especially really small companies, they have no idea where to start.
But I think that still kind of comes back to my point, what Joe was saying, is that so these things become industry standard. They're now talking about them. Companies know what they mean. But that means that so everyone pen tester that walks in the door and says, hey, I do phishing. I do pen testing. I do social engineering.
You're not saying it's
how much
buzzword
of
bingo, are you?
Yeah, I'm just trying to get you all drunk. So how much of a response?
Too late.
I do AI, crypto, blockchain pen testing.
God damn it! Oh man, everybody drink 3 times.
Time for shots.
You didn't say machine learning. You're not getting the contract. I'm sorry.
And because of my machine learning blockchain, I have good synergy with all of my clients. I'm just wondering how much of the job is it for us to really take the time to also educate our clients in what is and how to choose a proper vendor. It seems very self-serving because I know, like most of us, if we're doing that, we're going to point them towards us. But I was just curious, like how much of an effect that's having on.
But when the jargon becomes more mainstream amongst enterprises, right? They think, oh, I have MFA, so therefore I'm secure. When they've forgotten the step to take a step back, look at it holistically, and say, how do I design everything to be more resilient? How do I take something like authentication and allow it to identify the user more accurately, more efficiently every single time, rather than going, oh, yeah, that article that Joe wrote said MFA, so therefore I'm going to go get an MFA solution from someone, and now I'm going to get a pen test, and I'm going to be secure, right? I think that's the wrong approach.
And from a defensive point of view, going back to one of Wynn's early books, Time-Based Security, everything, when using things like multi-factor authentication, we can't look at it as the destination. We have to look at it as a roadblock for adversaries. We want to make something, we want to keep it as simple as possible for the users while making it as complex as possible for a potential adversary to afford us enough time to detect and respond.
Because I think that goes to a critical point, because I always ask my audiences when I make a presentation, how many of you are security professionals? They all raise their hands. I go, you're all failures then. Because the definition of security is being free from risk. And we're never going to be free from risk. Like multi-factor authentication, now there are great phishing messages that put a man in the middle of the attack where they phish. They send you to a different website, they phish your multi-factor authentication, and then they send it through. It still helps to alleviate and make things more difficult. And we have to make people understand this is all about reducing overall risk at the end of the day. Penetration test reduces risk if used properly, just like everything else. And we can't promise security because the only people that do that are fools or liars, or sometimes both.
No, I think you're right. We can only promise risk mitigation. And we can only deliver that in the context of the abilities that we have brought to bear at that particular focus at that particular time. So it's very conditioned, right? I mean, penetration testing is, I would argue, never exhaustive. It's really hard to do that, right? It just is. You can scope an effort and go, yeah, we're going to do an internal pen test, right? If you land in an organization that has 50,000 endpoints and you got 2 weeks to do an exhaustive internal pen test, I challenge any of you to say that you tested everything in that organization, right?
Well, absolutely.
Yeah.
And even if you did,
but then you have to deal with
dynamic. They change so quickly. The exhaustive pen test that you did today, next time they update their systems, next time they deploy something new, which is happening continuously. That's why I was saying
it's
pen
a
test
point
is
in
a
time.
snapshot in time, and it's a blurry snapshot.
Yeah, it's a blurry snapshot point in time. Exactly right, Ed.
That puts.
I just want to say,
So how do you fight against the guys who come in and say, oh, we're gonna secure your organization, and we're gonna do a full exhaustive pen test, and when we walk out of here, you'll be completely secure. How do you fight against that?
Here's the thing: you can't. You go in there and you start off. You just have to be honest, and there's too much work to go around these days. Too much good work that we're valuable enough that to fight all the FUD and to try to go out and fight every ass who comes up with a shingle and puts it up and says the best penetration tester. I just believe, try to be the best person you can be. And yes, some people are going to screw themselves by going with a lower vendor, but you can only do what you say. And if you start competing against people who don't deserve your time, you're going to be wasting too much time on that, because there is so much work out there for us if we could just do it right.
Yeah.
So one thing I want to hit on.
Wait, Larry, then Dave.
Yeah, real quick. So Tom, I want to be overly pedantic about your comment that when someone comes in and says, "Yeah, we're going to do this full scope pen test, we're going to test everything, and when we leave, you're going to be fully secure," is fucking lies. Because I'm there to find and hack everything and then tell you how I did it and how you can fix it. It's up to you to fix it. And if you can fix everything that I find by the time I walk out the door, what am I doing here? I just go fix it now. Because you already know about it. Because you're that good. Point, and that may be me being overly pedantic about sort of that language.
You're pedantic,
Dave.
Larry.
So Paul started this off.
He just wanted to say pedantic because it was on his word of the day calendar.
I did.
Yeah.
Word achieved.
Yep.
Paul started this whole thing off with asking us a question, and his question was, people talk about, is penetration testing dead? What's the value of penetration testing? And I think what you've heard over this past 45 minutes to 50 minutes is something that I'm so proud of being a part of, because we have matured so much over the past 10 years, over the past 5 years, over the past 2 years, to where we're talking about risk mitigation. We're having business conversations. We're looking at this from a enterprise perspective versus this is a vulnerability perspective, and that is a huge leap forward than we had 10 years ago. I would go into companies all the time, and to Ira's point earlier, which, by the way, Ira, are you lifting weights, man? Because your biceps are friggin' huge. I knew Ira once, but I don't know Buff Ira, and I'm friggin' jealous of his hair, too. You got more hair than me. Look at those guns.
I can't.
Holy smokes. Anyway, sorry.
P90X.
So I had to do a quick side rail there.
Dave did P90X for a while too, right?
I did the insanity stuff.
Yeah.
Is that what I was doing? P90X?
Yeah.
So Ed, aren't you too?
I am, yeah, absolutely.
Let's see the guns.
I also did insanity. No.
If you want, so the moral of the story is, you want to be a good pen tester, P90X or insanity workout. Dave, continue.
That's right.
Totally
That's right. Sorry. So I'll mention last thing here is that we're at a discussion now where we're having discussions with the board. We're having discussions with the enterprise. We're having discussions with executive level people. We're talking terminology. What is the risk to my business? Because we know that we're not going to be able to fix everything. And when we start to break it down to, instead of focusing on the results of the techniques that were used in a penetration test, but focus on that root cause analysis, how do we build our program out, and how do I adjust and prioritize that risk over time, that's the discussions that we should be having. And so, what I will say is that penetration testing is far from over. It's far from dead. In fact, I would say, and I don't know if it's even an argument, is that it's stronger than it's ever been, because we have grown, we have matured, and we have become a full-fledged industry that focuses on business risk. And that's something that's kudos to everybody here on the show. It's a kudos to the industry. It's just absolutely amazing to see.
And Dave, I think we're going to continue to grow, and I think we're going to continue to evolve. I think we're going to change that language, and I think we're going to take red pen test, purple, and sort of evolve that into one larger scope, and it's going to be great for everyone.
Absolutely. So in other words, what Dave and Larry just said is Ed was right when he opened this whole thing. The first thing Ed said.
Wow.
Bringing it full circle, right?
Ed is right. Ed is right. Wow. As usual. As usual.
I didn't realize this segment was all about Ed.
Let's say that this is
the man of many hats.
Let's say that this is true.
Ed and Ira's biceps.
If we accept that, and I'm not disagreeing with it, but how do we extend that to the greater audience, the greater number of companies out there that aren't receiving this benefit right now.
Come watch the show.
But there's two. It's exactly where I was going, Jeff. There's two aspects to that, right? How do we educate the customers so that they can raise the bar and use developed programs for pen testing to further their security? And how do we educate the industry or call those out that aren't doing the level of penetration testing or assessments that we discussed here tonight?
Here's where it comes down. There's a bit of education, and I hate to say it, but the media FUD is helping us a bit to at least get people to ask questions. Then there becomes the other issue of shoulds versus musts, where if security's a should, people should all over themselves. If security is a must, it must get done.
Drink.
And the problem is that too many people are shoulding all over themselves. Like, I should do this, and it's like, well, maybe I'll see about my antivirus and updating it to anti-malware. I don't know the difference, but it sounds right. You gotta really, we need pushes from outside. We need to take advantage of the media hype. The Ring attack, you're talking about a specific attack in this case. This is a case where, frankly, did Ring do anything wrong? I don't really think so. This is a case where
I would agree.
the
I
end
completely agree.
consumer really they reuse compromised credentials.
Yeah.
And what allows end consumers to continually reuse compromised credentials is our whole infrastructure. And it's more FUD, I hate to say it, but we need to get the people to say, hey, you know what? If you ever got a notice that your account was compromised, maybe change all your passwords and don't reuse it. That would be a starting point. Not have somebody say, oh, look at this child because they were using Ring. They should be like, oh, look at that parent because he's too stupid to know to change his password. So,
if any password manager vendors want to send me a check, it's a perfect time to have the conversation about password managers. That way you only have to know that one password to be able to get into the vault. You change it periodically. If you get notification that something in the vault has been compromised, you change it, and then you change everything else that's in the vault at whatever periodicity you feel comfortable with. If you're
that is
using
until an attacker takes control of your browser and the clipboard.
Well, there's that. But generally,
minor detail.
But risk reduction.
Right.
It is risk reduction, and overall, I would agree that password vaulting has been a good evolution in the industry. Yes, there are risks. There's no doubt. Right? There are risks to the software that's running in your browser. There are risks to the clipboard and hijacking the clipboard, but it is overall an improvement.
Yeah, and I have a bigger risk of tripping down those stairs where you guys didn't salt and there's ice on those stairs than, having a password manager on my PC.
I'll text you the landlord's number.
So at what point are we going to get past passwords though? Like, we know that end users are always going to pick bad passwords. So how is security? How can we start thinking outside of the box?
But some have. There are European countries, right, where to gain access to any resources in the country is implementing a full passwordless system.
That's a creative idea.
And it's had vulnerabilities, but they've fixed them. But it still accomplishes, I think, the next evolution from password to password vault to a passwordless system that, yes, will still have vulnerabilities like we all love to pick out and evangelize, which is important and must continue till the end of time, but removes the password as that attack.
But I see
vector.
this as a variation or extension of what Joff expressed earlier, is his fear of, sort of you're protecting against the particular pen test company. We can say it's an improvement. We say it's a good thing to do. My fear is that companies and individuals will think, well, I've done this now, I'm done.
Well,
that's the education point.
That's our job.
Never
our
done
job
it.
is to create that relationship, to be able to have that confidence to tell them this isn't a one-time shot, right? We have to keep going here.
There's a whole another education effort that some of our customers clearly understand and some don't, and that is exactly what you said. The opinion that, hey, I've done it, it's complete, let's seal it and walk away, versus security being a continuous management process.
But
we all know it's a continuous management process.
There's
right?
two aspects to that, though.
Yeah.
One is I'm reevaluating the vulnerabilities and exposures. The other is I'm reevaluating the risk of any known vulnerabilities or exposures. And those are two separate activities. That vulnerability I discovered last week and evaluated the risk at a 1 out of 10. Maybe now if I do the reevaluation, that's a 9 out of 10, right? And I don't see very many organizations doing that level of diligence unless the panel wants to prove me wrong.
Well, the one thing that I would say that goes further than what you were even talking about, Paul, in terms of evaluating the vulnerabilities and evaluating the risk, I would say that on top of that, they should reevaluate the configurations, because do you have someone who I would call a passive insider threat, someone who doesn't know, that just misconfigures something because they've always done it that way, because they're the owner's nephew that went to ITT Tech.
Or they're like me and many others that read bad advice on the internet on how
Right.
to configure things like containers.
Right. Or alternatively, they
can't
are
help you, Paul.
an active insider threat. And I'm sure Chris can back me up on this, but they're an active insider threat that's purposely introducing human error to stage a bad event to occur, whether it be leaking documents or opening someone up for some sort of attack via a misconfiguration or something to that effect.
Well, that again goes towards the resilience, because I hate that, but again, protect, detect, and react. No matter how well you protect something, it's gonna fail. The question is, how well are you detecting and reacting? And to a lot of the points that have been made, like how quickly do people detect pen tests and everything like that? How quickly are people set up to detect malicious actions? How quickly are they set up to react to it? That's as important in how much they try to protect against these attacks.
Oh, I agree. I think detection is key in all this, because let's face it, protection takes a long time. Depending on what I'm investing in, I need to, number one, get funds to invest in this protection, right? I need to bring it in front of an advisory board to get the approval to implement it. It could be months, it could be years before I can implement this, right? So having a detection technique, I think, is key, right? I mean, it helps you get through that protection period.
But I guess what should happen is, when you're going to the board to get the funding for protection, you should be simultaneously going to the board to say, well, I'm getting protection with this detection and this reaction, and this is part of a strategy.
Exactly.
Instead of trying to say, well, I need this tactic because MFA is the latest tactic. It's got to be a strategy that's presented to the approvers.
Well, I wanted to go back to something Dave said. Dave was talking about the importance of the relationship with the board, where you're talking their language, which is kind of what you're saying too, Ira. You're putting it in the right context of the business and its goals, not just, we're not dumping a bucket of water on the fire. We're building a railroad track one tie at a time, and we got to get to the end. And there's also a trust component that you're building, because there's that guy that reads the message that this is not being exploited in the wild, and so therefore I'm not going to vote to do it. Having that trust relationship hopefully then builds the conversation that you can then say, well, yeah, but they just released the exploit code. Anybody can find it on GitHub, and so really we should look at it. I'm saying it's a non-trivial problem, and I'm trying to trivialize it.
I completely agree. And just to the point, frankly, most organizations don't need penetration testing, because they're already being constantly penetrated anyway.
For free.
For free.
You know what's interesting?
It's a service. The
segue
internet
a bit
provides that
to
service.
IoT, right? Panasonic takes their IoT devices, it puts them out on the internet, and it monitors them to see how they're hacked and funnels that back into their development life cycle. To speak to, yes, we're all being attacked all the time, right? And the difference, but I think the difference is with an IoT device, you can observe those attacks a little more easily. It's a more scaled down environment. The difference when an external attacker does it versus a penetration tester is the attacker typically doesn't issue me a report and explain how exactly they did everything, right?
Not
that
so
piece
much.
is missing. Well, I want to just, Dave had a comment earlier.
Yeah, so two things really quick. So 9 years ago, I was the chief security officer over for Diebold. And one thing I can say, and I got very fortunate there, is that I had a very good relationship with our CFO, who I reported to directly, and our CEO and our board of directors. And our CEO gave us, based on the trust relationship that I was able to build with him, gave a mandate out to our IT staff, our CIO, who I was peers with in the company, to fix our program at all costs. And literally, we had a blanket of what we could decide for our budget, and I was very respectful of that. It wasn't like, hey, I need $50 million to fix all these issues. But, we went from, 5 people to 55 people. We were able to make some major impact and changes to the overall organization. I had all of the executive vice presidents reporting to me, not reporting to me, but reporting on the what we call the Governance, Risk, and Compliance Oversight Board, where we all met on business risk and talked about areas that they needed to focus on. It became a major priority for them, and I really think that was due to talking to the same language as them around business risk and what the problems were. The last thing that our CEO wanted was, us being a manufacturer of ATMs and other things, and obviously they had the historical baggage around the voting machines, which caveat, I came in after the voting machine issues. It's one of those things where they didn't want that type of pain to happen ever again. And that made a huge impact, I think, on what we were able to accomplish in the security program. And it comes with that board level trust, it comes with the executive trust, and it comes with talking the same language to be able to address that business risk. Now, the last thing I want to switch gears on really fast, and maybe if no one wants to touch this topic, I'm totally fine with that. But what does everybody feel? How does everybody feel about the demonization of offensive security tools now?
Oh, geez.
Oh boy, that may be
another day.
That may be saved for another day.
Just
Dave,
don't say Wassenaar.
And everyone else, you are all welcome back on the show.
TLDR, that concept can die in a fire. Done.
I will say
I fully agree with you.
I will say that Ed Scotus has won for the most hats ever worn on a single Security Weekly segment. Thank you for that, Ed. That was awesome.
See it, Chris.
And
do we have a Security Weekly challenge coin? I'm just wondering. Because we could give.
Ed already has one of those, but Ed won. We'll figure out what the prize is and mail it to you. And if the box never mind. Thank you, everyone, for participating in this segment. It's been a lot of fun. With that, we will conclude this and come back and do the Holiday Hack Challenge. At least next today, how the air might be different, but Holiday Hack Challenge. Stay tuned. Thank you, everyone.